November 1944, Belgium. Lieutenant James Mackay sat inside 16 tons of steel that every tanker in the battalion called a coffin with tracks. The M5 Stuart, 37mm gun, armor thickness maxing out at 2 inches on the best day. The Germans had Tigers prowling these woods, 70 tons, 88mm cannons, armor 4 inches thick on the sides, 7 inches on the front. Mackay had done the math in his head so many times, he saw it when he closed his eyes. A Tiger shell could penetrate his tank from over a mile away. His gun might scratch Tiger paint at 200 yards if he was lucky and God was drunk. Mackay was 24, a farm kid from outside Des Moines who had never touched a firearm until basic training. His older brother Danny had been a tank commander. Past tense. Danny had died 3 months earlier in France, when his Sherman took an 88 to the turret ring. The telegram came to the family farm the same week Mackay got his commission. His mother cried for 2 days straight. His father did not cry at all. He just looked at James across the dinner table and said one sentence: "Do not be stupid like your brother." Mackay arrived at the battalion in early November, with that sentence still ringing in his head. He reported to Colonel Harrigan, a West Point man with a silver star and a face like carved granite. Harrigan took one look at Mackay's orders assigning him to a Stuart and actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A full belly laugh that made the other officers in the tent turn their heads. Harrigan pointed at Mackay's tank sitting in the motor pool and said, "Son, that thing is a death trap. You will do reconnaissance. Stay off the roads when the real tankers are working. Try not to embarrass yourself." The Sherman commanders were worse. Captain Delaney, a man who wore his combat infantryman badge like it was the Medal of Honor, walked past Mackay's Stuart and made a show of inspecting it. He rapped his knuckles on the thin armor and grinned. "Bringing a BB gun to a knife fight," he said. The other tankers laughed. Mackay stood there holding his helmet and said nothing. He climbed into his tank and met his crew for the first time. Thompson, the driver. 19 years old from Brooklyn with a mouth that never stopped running. Martinez, the gunner. 22, busted down from a Sherman crew for punching a supply sergeant. Riley, the assistant driver and hull gunner. 43 years old, lied about his age to get into combat after his son was killed at Anzio. None of them wanted to be in a Stuart. All of them knew what happened to light tanks that got into real fights. Thompson made a joke about writing his will. Martinez said nothing and stared at the 37mm gun like it had personally offended him. Riley lit a cigarette and looked at Mackay with eyes that had already seen too much. The first 2 weeks were humiliation duty. Escort supply trucks, guard crossroads, sit in a field while the Shermans rolled past to engage German positions. Mackay listened to the radio chatter, heard Delaney's voice calling out kills. Panzer IV knocked out, Stew G burning. The Sherman crews came back to the motor pool with tally marks painted on their turrets and stories to tell. Mackay came back with mud on his tracks and nothing to report. His crew played cards. Thompson talked about girls back home. Martinez cleaned his gun until the bore shone like a mirror. Riley smoked and stared at a photograph of his son that was creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. Then came the 15th of November, a morning when the fog was so thick you could not see the front of your own tank from the turret. The battalion was pushing toward a Belgian town called Houffalize. Intelligence said light resistance. Harrigan sent his Shermans up the main road in column formation, engines roaring, commanders confident. He sent Mackay into the woods on a parallel route. His exact words over the radio were, "Scout 2, stay out of the way, and try not to get lost. If you see anything bigger than a bicycle, run." Mackay took his Stuart into the forest. The trees were ancient fir, trunks thick as oil drums, branches so dense they blocked what little light filtered through the fog. Thompson drove slowly, weaving between trees that scraped the hull with sounds like fingernails on metal. The fog turned everything into gray shapes. Mackay stood in the turret with his head out, freezing air burning his lungs, straining to see anything beyond 10 feet. His hands were numb. His face felt like raw meat. He was thinking about Danny, wondering if his brother had been scared in those last seconds before the shell hit, wondering if it had been quick. Then he heard it. A sound that did not belong. Deep. Mechanical. A rumble that came up through the ground and into his bones. Not the high whine of a Sherman engine. Something heavier. Something that made the frost on the trees vibrate. Mackay dropped into the turret so fast he cracked his knee on the hatch rim. He grabbed the radio handset, and his hand was shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "All units, this is Scout 2. Possible heavy armor contact. Grid 479er231. Advise caution on main approach." Static. Then Harrigan's voice irritated. "Scout 2, confirm visual identification. I am not stopping in advance based on possible contact from a scout crew." Mackay looked at Martinez. The gunner was staring back at him, waiting. Thompson had stopped the tank and was listening on the intercom, his breathing audible. Riley held a 37mm shell halfway to the breach, frozen. Mackay thought about his father's words. "Do not be stupid like your brother." The smart move was to back up. Report unconfirmed contact. Let the Shermans handle it. That was doctrine. That was survival. That was what kept light tank crews alive. Instead, Mackay told Thompson to move forward, toward the sound. They crept through the fog like a mouse approaching a sleeping lion. The rumbling grew louder, close enough now that Mackay could feel it in his chest. Then the fog shifted, and he saw it. A shape so massive it did not seem real. Gray steel covered in Zimmerit anti-magnetic paste. A turret the size of a small room. The long barrel of an 88mm gun pointing down the road where the American column was about to appear. A Tiger I. And its commander was standing in the cupola with binoculars, watching the road, completely unaware that Mackay's Stuart was 30 yards behind him in the trees. Mackay's mind went blank. Pure white nothing. He could hear his own heartbeat. He could hear Thompson's breathing over the intercom. He could hear Martinez whisper, "Oh, Jesus." The Tiger was waiting in ambush. The Shermans would roll right into the kill zone. Harrigan's tank would be first. Delaney's would be second. They would die before they knew what hit them. Just like Danny. The training manuals were clear. Light tanks do not engage heavy armor. Ever. The 37mm gun could not penetrate Tiger armor from any angle. It was suicide. Mackay opened his mouth to order Thompson to reverse, to get them out of there, to radio a warning and run. The words formed in his throat. Then he looked at Riley. The old man was still holding that shell. His face was pale. His hands were steady. He was looking at Mackay with an expression that said, "Whatever you decide, I am with you." And Mackay thought about Danny burning to death in a Sherman because nobody had spotted the German gun waiting in ambush. He thought about Harrigan laughing at his tank. He thought about Delaney calling him a joke. He thought about his father's words and realized something. Danny had not been stupid. Danny had been brave. There was a difference. Mackay's voice came out steady. Load armor piercing. Thompson, angle right. Get us perpendicular to his flank. Slow. Quiet. Do not let him hear the engine. The Stuart moved. Thompson was good. He kept the engine at idle, used the trees for cover, maneuvered them around until they were 90 degrees off the Tiger's flank. The side armor was still 3 inches thick. Still too much for a 37-millimeter gun under normal circumstances. But Mackay was not thinking about normal anymore. He was thinking about weak points, track assemblies, sponson doors, the gap between the hull and turret where the armor was thinner. He put his eye to the periscope and saw the Tiger's commander still focused on the road, still waiting for the Americans to roll into his trap. Fire. Martinez pulled the trigger. The Stuart rocked backward from recoil. The shell crossed 30 yards in a fraction of a heartbeat and hit the Tiger's side armor just above the right track. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then smoke started pouring from the impact point. Not fire, not an explosion, just smoke. A mobility kill maybe. Damage to the track assembly or suspension. Not enough. The Tiger's turret began to traverse. Slowly at first because the hydraulics were cold, then faster, as the German crew realized they were under attack. Mackay watched the 88-millimeter gun barrel swing toward them like the hand of a clock. He had maybe 8 seconds before that gun pointed at his position. 8 seconds to live or die. His voice cracked when he shouted, "Fire again." Same spot. Now. Riley slammed another shell into the breach so hard Mackay heard the metal ring. Martinez adjusted aim by inches. The Tiger's gun was still traversing. Mackay could see the German commander's face now. Young. Maybe younger than him. Eyes wide with shock and rage. The commander was screaming orders into his throat microphone. The gun barrel was almost lined up. Martinez fired. The second shell hit 6 inches from the first. This time, something inside the Tiger's hull caught fire. Real fire. Black smoke boiled out of the impact point, and the German commander's expression changed from rage to terror. He started screaming at his crew to bail out. The driver's hatch flew open, and a man climbed out, his uniform smoking. Then the bow gunner. Then the commander himself, sliding down the turret and running for the tree line. The Tiger sat there, burning. Flames licking out of the vision ports. Ammunition starting to cook off inside with sounds like firecrackers. Mackay's crew was silent. Thompson had both hands on the controls and was staring straight ahead at nothing. Martinez was breathing in short gasps like he had just run a mile. Riley was holding an unloaded shell and looking at the burning Tiger, with an expression Mackay could not read. Mackay grabbed the radio. "All units, Scout 2. Tiger neutralized at previous grid. Main road is clear." Harrigan's voice came back 10 seconds later. "Say again." "Scout 2. Tiger neutralized. 1 enemy heavy tank destroyed. Road is clear for advance." Silence. Then, what destroyed it? Mackay looked at his crew, at the thin armor around them, at the 37-millimeter gun that was not supposed to be able to do what they had just done. He keyed the mic. "We did, sir." The Sherman column rolled past 20 minutes later. Mackay stood in his turret and watched them go. Harrigan's command tank slowed as it passed the burning Tiger. The colonel stood in his cupola and stared at the wreckage. Then he looked at Mackay's Stuart, sitting in the trees. He did not laugh. He did not say anything, he just stared. Then his tank rolled on. That night, the motor pool was quiet. The Sherman crews worked on their tanks and did not look at Mackay. Delaney walked past without making eye contact. Nobody made jokes about BB guns. Nobody laughed. Mackay sat on his Stuart's fender with a rag, cleaning oil off his hands. His crew was doing maintenance. Thompson was checking the suspension. Martinez was cleaning the gun again, even though it did not need it. Riley was smoking and looking at the stars. Mackay's hands would not stop shaking. The adrenaline had worn off and left him hollow. He kept seeing the Tiger's gun barrel swinging toward them. Kept seeing those 8 seconds playing out in his head. If Martinez had missed, if the shell had hit an inch to the left, if the German crew had been faster, they would be dead. All of them. Burned alive in a tank that everyone knew was a death trap. But they were not dead. And the Tiger was. Mackay looked at his hands. Farmers' hands that had fixed tractors and baled hay and held his brother's posthumous Purple Heart at the funeral. He thought about angles, about timing, about how the Tiger had been so focused on the road that it never checked its flanks, about how fear could make trained soldiers sloppy, about how a small tank in the right position could do things a big tank would never attempt, because a big tank did not have to. An idea was forming. Not clear yet. Not something he could explain. But it was there. A tactic. A method. A way to turn a death trap into something the Germans would learn to fear. He did not know it yet. But he had 4 more Tigers to kill. And the next one would not be luck. It would be murder. 3 days after Mackay killed his first Tiger, he killed his second. Then his third. Then the Germans started leaving bodies behind as warnings. The second Tiger died on November 18th in a forest clearing 6 miles east of Houffalize. Mackay had spent those 3 days thinking, not celebrating, not bragging to the other crews, thinking. He spread a map across the Stuart's engine deck and studied terrain. He read intelligence reports about German tank positions. He listened to radio intercepts. And he noticed something that nobody else was paying attention to. The Tigers were predictable. They were not stupid. The German crews were veterans, skilled, disciplined. But they were predictable because they thought like heavy tank commanders. They picked positions with good sight lines. They positioned themselves to engage at range where their armor and firepower gave them overwhelming advantage. They dominated ground the way a castle dominates a valley. And that was the problem. Castles do not move. Castles do not check their flanks every 30 seconds. Castles assume the enemy will come through the front gate. Mackay was not coming through the front gate. He started taking his Stuart on unauthorized patrols. Not reconnaissance, hunting. He would study the map, pick terrain where Tigers might set up ambush positions, and go looking for them. Harrigan did not stop him, because Harrigan did not know. Mackay would report routine patrol activity over the radio, while Thompson drove them deep into contested forest, where American tanks were not supposed to go. His crew thought he had gone insane. Martinez said it out loud on the second patrol. "Lieutenant, we are going to die doing this." Mackay did not disagree. He just kept driving deeper into German territory. The second Tiger was waiting in a clearing surrounded by thick forest. Perfect position. The German commander had clear fields of fire in 3 directions. The only approach that offered cover was from behind, through dense woods that no sensible tanker would attempt because the trees were too close together. Mackay went through those trees. Thompson drove the Stuart between trunks with inches of clearance on each side, scraping paint, breaking vision blocks, making sounds that should have alerted every German soldier within a mile. But the Tiger crew did not hear them. The Tiger's engine was idling. Its own noise covered their approach. Mackay brought the Stuart to within 40 yards of the Tiger's rear armor. The Tiger was facing away from them, watching the clearing. Its commander was standing in the cupola, scanning with binoculars. Relaxed, confident, safe in his 70-ton fortress. Mackay put his eye to the periscope and studied the Tiger's rear deck. Engine compartment, cooling louvers, thin armor compared to the front. Still not easy to penetrate with a 37mm gun, but possible. He waited. 5 minutes. 10. Watching. Making sure there were no supporting infantry. No other tanks. Just the Tiger and its crew. Then he gave the order to fire. Martinez put a shell through the engine deck at point-blank range. The Tiger did not explode. It died. The engine stopped. Smoke poured from the louvers. The German crew bailed out in a panic, thinking they were under attack from American tank destroyers or Shermans. They ran into the woods without ever seeing the Stuart. Mackay did not chase them. He just marked the position on his map and pulled back before German infantry could respond. 2 Tigers in 4 days. The battalion officers started asking questions. Harrigan called Mackay to his command post and stood there with his arms crossed, staring. "How are you doing this?" he asked. Mackay told him the truth. "I am hunting them, sir. The Tigers set up in predictable positions. They watch the approaches they expect us to use. They do not watch their flanks or their rear because they think they are invincible. I am teaching them they are not." Harrigan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something Mackay did not expect. "Keep doing it. But if you get your crew killed, I will put it in your service record that you died being stupid." The 3rd Tiger died 2 days later. Mackay found it guarding a crossroads, positioned hull down behind a low ridge with only its turret visible. Classic, heavy tank tactics. Impossible to flank because the ground was open in all directions. Impossible to approach without being seen. Mackay studied the position for an hour through binoculars from a concealed spot half a mile away. He watched the Tiger's turret traverse left and right, scanning for targets. He watched the commander standing in the cupola. He watched. And he noticed something. Every 15 minutes, the Tiger would move. Just a few feet. Repositioning to cover a different angle. And when it moved, it would reverse slightly, then shift, then move forward again. A pattern. Predictable. Mackay waited until the Tiger moved. Then he moved. He brought the Stuart out of cover at full speed, racing across open ground while the Tiger was repositioning, and its main gun was not oriented toward the approach. Thompson pushed the engine to maximum, 36 miles per hour. The Stuart bounced over rough ground, tracks throwing mud, engine screaming. Martinez was thrown against the turret wall. Riley was shouting something Mackay could not hear over the noise. They covered 400 yards in 40 seconds. The Tiger's commander saw them. Mackay watched the man's face change from bored alertness to shock. The commander started screaming into his microphone. The turret began to traverse. But the Tiger was still in the middle of repositioning. Its hull was angled. Its tracks were churning mud. The driver was trying to settle the tank into a firing position, while the gunner tried to track a target that was moving at 36 miles per hour and closing fast. Mackay told Thompson to angle hard left at 200 yards. The Stuart skidded into a turn that nearly threw Mackay out of the turret. Then Thompson straightened out, and they were running parallel to the Tiger's flank. Martinez had the 37mm gun tracking, waiting for Mackay's order. The Tiger's turret was still traversing, still trying to catch up. Mackay waited until they were at 150 yards, close enough that the shell would hit with maximum velocity, far enough that if the Tiger fired first, it might miss a moving target. Fire. Martinez fired on the move. The shell hit the Tiger's side armor just below the turret ring. Sparks. Smoke. Penetration. Something inside caught fire. The Tiger stopped moving. Its turret stopped traversing. For a moment, everything was still. Then the commander climbed out of the cupola, moving slowly like a man in a dream. His uniform was smoking. He fell off the turret and did not get up. 3 Tigers. Mackay's crew had stopped making jokes about death traps. They had stopped questioning his orders. Thompson drove wherever Mackay told him to drive without hesitation. Martinez fired when Mackay gave the order without doubt. Riley loaded shells with mechanical precision and said nothing. They were not a scout crew anymore. They were killers. The 4th and 5th Tigers died on the same day, November 22nd. And that was when everything changed. Mackay found them by accident. He was running a patrol along a ridgeline when he spotted movement in a valley below. 2 Tigers, moving in formation, supporting each other, covering each other's flanks. The German crews had learned. They were not sitting in static positions anymore. They were moving, hunting, looking for the American tank that had been killing their brothers. Mackay should have pulled back. 2 Tigers moving in coordination was not a fight he could win. The math did not work. But he was not thinking about math anymore. He was thinking about Danny, about Harrigan's laugh, about every tanker who had ever called his Stuart a joke. He was thinking about the German commander falling off his turret with his uniform smoking. And he made a decision that was either genius or suicide. He told Thompson to get above them on the ridge, to position the Stuart where they could see down into the valley. Then he waited. The 2 Tigers were moving slowly, scanning the forest, coordinating over radio. Professional, disciplined, deadly. Mackay watched them through his periscope and thought about angles, about timing, about the fact that when 2 Tigers were moving together, they watched each other's flanks, but they did not watch above them. Nobody expects an attack from high ground when you are in a 70-ton tank. The Tigers moved into position below him, maybe 80 yards away, maybe less, close enough that Mackay could see the German commanders standing in their cupolas. Young men, scared men, men who knew there was an American tank out there somewhere that was killing Tigers with a gun that should not be able to kill Tigers. They were looking for him. He was right above them. Mackay gave the order. Fire on the lead tank, engine deck, then traverse to the second tank before he can react. Martinez fired. The shell dropped down onto the lead Tiger's engine deck at a steep angle. Penetration. Fire. The Tiger stopped moving. Its commander started shouting. The second Tiger's turret began to traverse, looking for the threat. Looking at ground level, not looking up. Martinez traversed the 37mm gun. Riley loaded another shell. Mackay counted seconds. 3, 4, 5. The second Tiger's commander was still looking for them at the wrong elevation. Martinez fired again. The second shell hit the second Tiger's turret side at an angle that turned 2 inches of armor into effectively less. Penetration. Smoke. The Tiger's main gun fired reflexively, sending an 88mm shell into the hillside 50 yards from where Mackay was actually positioned. Both Tigers were burning. Both crews were bailing out. And Mackay sat in his turret watching them run and felt nothing. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just cold certainty that he had figured something out that nobody else knew. Light tanks could kill heavy tanks if you stopped fighting fair. The German crews made it to the tree line, 7 men total. They looked back at their burning tanks. Then one of them, an officer by his uniform, looked up at the ridgeline. He could not see the Stuart, but he knew it was there. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the spot where Mackay was hidden. Then he turned and walked into the forest with his surviving crew. That night, the battalion received an intelligence report. The Germans had broadcast a warning on their tactical frequencies. American light tanks operating in sector. Extreme caution advised. Tiger crews were being ordered to maintain security at all times, to never operate in static positions, to always have infantry support. The report noted that this was unusual. The Germans did not normally warn their tank crews about American light tanks because American light tanks were not considered a serious threat. Mackay read the report and felt something cold settle in his chest. The Germans were afraid, not of the battalion, not of the Shermans, of him, of his Stuart, of the death trap that kept killing their best crews in their best tanks. They were changing their tactics because of him. Harrigan called him to the command post. The colonel looked older than he had a week ago, tired. When he spoke, his voice had none of the dismissive arrogance from their first meeting. The Germans are pulling their Tigers back from forward positions, he said. They are consolidating them in defensive clusters with heavy infantry support. Our advance is moving faster because we are not running into ambushes. You did that? Your toy tank did that? Mackay said nothing. He was thinking about the German officer staring up at the ridgeline, about the expression on that man's face, about the fact that somewhere in the German lines, tank commanders were telling their crews to be afraid of a 16-ton Stuart with a 37mm gun. The math still said it was impossible. The burned wrecks said otherwise. 5 Tigers in 8 days. The Stuart had a tally painted on its turret now. Riley had done it without asking permission. 5 black crosses, German style, a message to anyone who saw them. Mackay's crew did not talk about it. They just kept hunting. Because they had learned something too. Death traps only kill you if you fight like everyone expects you to fight. But if you fight like a ghost, like something that should not exist, like a nightmare that German tank commanders tell stories about in the dark, then maybe the death trap becomes something else. Maybe it becomes the thing that tigers fear. The intelligence officer who briefed Mackay on November 24th was a captain named Weiss. He had a Yale degree and a nervous habit of adjusting his glasses every 30 seconds. He spread reconnaissance photographs across the map table and pointed at a farmhouse complex 5 miles behind German lines. Tiger tank, he said. Confirmed visual identification. Dug in. Infantry support. Maybe a full company. Command wants it destroyed before the next push. Mackay studied the photographs. The Tiger was positioned in a barn with the front wall removed, giving it a perfect field of fire across open ground. Textbook defensive position. The barn's remaining walls protected the flanks and rear. German infantry occupied the farmhouse and outbuildings. Foxholes ringed the entire complex. Machine gun nests covered the approaches. It was a fortress. Weiss looked at Mackay and said, "We are sending a full Sherman platoon with infantry support. You will provide reconnaissance and flank security." Mackay said nothing. He was looking at the photograph and seeing something Weiss was not seeing. The barn was stone construction, thick walls, but there was a hayloft. He could see the loft door in the photograph, a dark rectangle above the Tiger's position. And behind the barn complex, maybe 200 yards back, there was a tree line on elevated ground. He traced the angle with his finger. Weiss watched him and frowned. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Mackay looked up. "I am thinking the Sherman platoon is going to lose tanks if they go through the front. I am thinking there might be another way." Weiss adjusted his glasses. The captain who commanded the Sherman platoon was standing nearby. His name was Vickers. He had a combat infantry badge and a fresh scar across his jaw from shrapnel. He walked over to the map table and looked at Mackay like he was examining something unpleasant. "You are the Stuart commander," he said, "the one who has been killing tigers." Mackay nodded. Vickers stared at him for a long moment. "How are you doing it?" "Everyone wants to know. The 37mm gun cannot penetrate tiger armor. That is a fact." "So how?" Mackay could have lied, could have deflected. Instead, he told the truth. "I do not fight them head-on. I find weak points. Engine decks. Turret rings. Side armor at close range. I hit them from angles they do not expect. I make them panic. Panicked crews make mistakes." Vickers was quiet. Then he said something Mackay was not expecting. "Show me. Show me how you would kill that tiger." Mackay looked at Weiss. The intelligence officer shrugged. "Vickers is right. If you have a method, we should know it. Our crews are dying because we are fighting tigers the same way we fought Panzer IVs. Frontal engagements. Slugging matches. We need something different." Mackay picked up a pencil and drew on the map. "The tiger is dug in here. Good position. But look at the barn structure. Stone walls, wooden roof. There is a hay loft above the tiger's position. Now look at this tree line behind the barn. Elevated ground. If I can get my Stuart into that tree line, I have a plunging angle down through the barn roof onto the tiger's top armor." Vickers leaned forward. "Top armor is thin. 25mm on the hull roof. 40mm on the turret roof. Your 37mm gun can penetrate that at close range. But how do you get into that tree line without being spotted? The approaches are all open ground." Mackay traced a route on the map. "I go in at night. No lights, no radio. Thompson drives by moonlight. We take this farm track that runs parallel to the German position, stay low in the terrain folds, and approach from the north, where their security is weakest, because they are focused on the American lines to the west. We get into position before dawn, wait for first light, when their sentries are tired and visibility is poor. Then I fire down through the barn roof before they know I am there." Weiss was shaking his head. "That is insane. If you are spotted, you will be cut off behind enemy lines with no support. If you miss the shot, the Tiger crew will know your position, and you cannot escape through open ground in daylight. If the barn roof is thicker than it looks in the photograph, your shell will not penetrate, and you will have given away your position for nothing." Mackay looked at Vickers. The captain was studying the map. His expression was unreadable. Finally he spoke. "If you can kill that tiger before we attack, my Shermans will not have to assault a prepared position with heavy anti-tank support. I will lose fewer men. Maybe no men." His eyes met Mackay's. "Can you do this?" Mackay thought about the math, about the variables, about the 100 things that could go wrong. Then he thought about his crew, about Thompson, who drove like he was born in a tank, about Martinez, who never missed, about Riley, who loaded shells with the mechanical precision of a man who had already lost everything that mattered and had nothing left to fear. He thought about Danny burning to death in a Sherman, about 5 tigers that were supposed to be unkillable, about the German officer staring up at the ridgeline with fear in his eyes. "Yes," Mackay said, "I can do this." They left at midnight, no convoy, no support, just Mackay's Stuart rolling through frozen darkness, with the engine at idle and the headlights off. Thompson drove by moonlight, following farm tracks that showed as pale lines across dark fields. The night was cold enough that their breath frosted inside the tank. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the engine's low rumble and the squeak of the tracks. They reached the approach route at 0200 hours. Mackay navigated by compass and map, checking landmarks against the reconnaissance photographs. A destroyed church, a stone bridge, a farmhouse with no roof. The terrain folds were deeper than they looked in the photographs. Good. That gave them cover. Thompson drove the Stuart down into a drainage ditch that ran parallel to the German position and followed it north. The ditch was barely wide enough. The tank's fenders scraped the banks on both sides. At 0330, they stopped. Mackay climbed out of the turret and crawled forward to observe. He could see the barn complex 400 yards away. Dark shapes. No lights. But he could hear voices. German sentries talking in low tones. The sounds carried in the cold air. He crawled back to the tank and told his crew what he had seen. "We have 2 hours until first light," he said. "We use that time to get into position in the tree line. Slow. Quiet. If they hear us, we are dead." They moved at walking speed. Thompson guided the Stuart out of the drainage ditch and across open ground toward the tree line. The moon was setting. The darkness was absolute. Mackay stood in the turret with his eyes straining to see obstacles. A fence post, a shell crater, anything that would make noise if they hit it. The distance was only 200 yards, but it took 40 minutes to cross. Every sound the tank made seemed loud enough to wake the dead. The squeak of a track return roller, the clink of a tool shifting in its bracket, the hiss of hydraulic fluid. They reached the tree line at 0415. Mackay positioned the Stuart between 2 large fir trees that would break up the tank's silhouette. Then they waited. Riley lit a cigarette and Mackay did not stop him. The smoke would dissipate before dawn. Martinez checked the gun's elevation mechanism. They would be firing at a steep downward angle, something the 37mm gun was not designed for. The traverse mechanism groaned as Martinez tested it. Mackay held his breath, but no alarm came from the German position. First light came at 0550. The sky turned from black to gray. Shapes emerged from darkness. Mackay could see the barn now. The tiger inside it, hull down, only the turret visible. German infantry moving between the buildings. Sentries changing shifts. He put his eye to the periscope and studied the barn roof. It was wooden. Old. He could see gaps between the boards. That was good. Rotten wood would offer less resistance than new timber. He calculated the angle. The Stuart was 200 yards away, and maybe 60 feet higher than the Tiger. The shell would drop at roughly a 30-degree angle. He would have to aim for the center of the roof, trust that the shell would punch through the wood and hit the Tiger's turret or hull roof below. One shot. If he missed, if the shell hit a roof beam and deflected, the Germans would know exactly where he was. They would swarm the tree line with infantry. His crew would die in the trees trying to escape. Martinez was waiting for the order. His hands were steady on the gun controls. Riley had a shell loaded and another ready. Thompson was in the driver's seat with the engine at idle, ready to move the instant Mackay gave the word. They were all looking at him, waiting, trusting him to make the right call. He thought about Weiss saying this plan was insane, about Vickers asking if he could do this, about his father saying, "Do not be stupid like your brother." Mackay gave the order to fire. The 37mm gun cracked. The shell crossed 200 yards in less than a second and hit the barn roof dead center. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the roof exploded. Not from the shell. From secondary explosions inside the barn. The Tiger's ammunition cooking off, flames erupted through the roof. Black smoke boiled into the dawn sky. German soldiers were running from the farmhouse, shouting, pointing at the barn. The Tiger's crew tried to bail out, but the fire was too intense. Mackay watched one man get halfway out of the commander's cupola before the smoke forced him back down. Then the German infantry spotted the Stuart. Someone shouted and pointed at the tree line. Machine gun fire ripped through the branches above Mackay's head. He dropped into the turret and screamed at Thompson to reverse. The Stuart lurched backward, tracks tearing up frozen ground. Bullets sparked off the armor. A burst hit the turret, and one round came through a vision block, missing Martinez's head by inches. Thompson drove them back into the drainage ditch at full speed. The tank bounced over rough ground, throwing the crew against the walls. Mackay's head cracked against the periscope mount, and his vision went white for a second. When it cleared, they were in the ditch, and German small arms fire was passing overhead. Thompson did not slow down. He drove the Stuart through the ditch at maximum speed, retracing their route, putting distance between them and the German position. They reached American lines at 0700. The sentries almost shot them before Mackay identified himself over the radio. Vickers was waiting at the crossing point with his Sherman platoon. He looked at Mackay's Stuart. The armor was scarred with bullet strikes. The vision block was shattered. The crew was alive. Vickers did not smile, but something in his expression changed. "The Tiger?" he asked. "Dead," Mackay said. "Ammunition fire. Total loss." Vickers nodded slowly. His Sherman platoon rolled past the Stuart toward the German position. No need to assault a fortress anymore. Just mop up confused infantry and secure the ground. Mackay sat on his tank's fender and realized his hands were shaking again. The adrenaline crash was hitting. Martinez climbed out of the turret and vomited into the dirt. Thompson sat in the driver's hatch with his head in his hands. Riley lit another cigarette and stared at nothing. That afternoon, Weiss came to find Mackay in the motor pool. The intelligence officer looked different, less nervous. He did not adjust his glasses once. "I talked to Colonel Harrigan," he said. "He wants you to brief the battalion's tank commanders on your methods. How you identify weak points. How you approach targets. How you exploit angles and timing. We are losing too many Shermans in frontal engagements. Your tactics might save lives." Mackay thought about that. About standing in front of officers who had called his tank a joke and teaching them how to kill tigers. About turning his survival instincts into doctrine. About the fact that Danny had died because his Sherman commander fought fair and the Germans did not. Maybe that was the real lesson. War was not about fighting fair. It was about coming home alive. That night, Mackay sat in his tank and wrote notes. Weak points on German armor, approach angles, firing positions, the difference between courage and suicide. He wrote until his hand cramped. Then he looked at the 5 black crosses painted on his turret and thought about the German crews who had died inside those tigers. Young men like him, scared men like him, men who thought their heavy armor would keep them safe. He did not feel triumph. He felt tired. And he felt certain that somewhere in the German lines, officers were writing their own notes about American light tanks that killed from impossible angles, about tactics to counter a threat that should not exist, about the Stuart commander who had turned the math upside down. The hunter was about to become the hunted. And Mackay knew it. The German trap was set on November 28th. Mackay did not know it yet. He was sitting in a briefing tent, listening to Colonel Harrigan describe a target that sounded too good to be true. A single Tiger tank, isolated, operating without infantry support near a crossroads village called L'Outremange. Intelligence reported the Tiger was damaged. Track problems, possibly a thrown wheel. The crew was attempting field repairs. Harrigan looked at Mackay and said, "This is your kind of target. Finish it." Mackay studied the reconnaissance photographs. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his gut. The Tiger was positioned in the open, visible from the air, making no attempt at concealment. That was not how German tank crews operated, especially not Tiger crews who knew an American light tank was hunting them. He pointed at the photograph. "Sir, this does not make sense. Why would they leave a damaged Tiger exposed? Why not tow it back to a repair depot? Why keep it in a forward position where we can hit it?" Harrigan leaned back in his chair. Maybe they could not move it. Maybe the damage is worse than they thought. Maybe they are desperate. Or maybe, Lieutenant, you are overthinking this. We have a chance to destroy a Tiger without risking a Sherman platoon. Take your Stuart and kill it. That is an order." Mackay saluted. He walked back to his tank where his crew was waiting. Thompson was cleaning the driver's vision blocks. Martinez was adjusting the gun's traverse mechanism. Riley was smoking and looking at Mackay with eyes that had seen enough combat to recognize when something was wrong. The old man did not say anything. He just raised an eyebrow. Mackay told them about the target, about the Tiger sitting in the open with track damage, about his gut feeling that something was off. Martinez stopped working on the gun and looked up. "So what do? "We go," Mackay said. "But we go careful. We assume this is a trap until we know it is not." They rolled out at 1400 hours. No escort, no support, just the Stuart moving through frozen forest toward L'Outremange. Mackay navigated by map and compass, taking a route that kept them in heavy terrain where they could use cover. The day was overcast, gray sky, temperature dropping, the kind of weather that made everything harder. Visibility was poor. Footing was treacherous. Perfect conditions for an ambush. They reached the outskirts of L'Outremange at 15:30. Mackay halted the Stuart in a tree line and dismounted to observe. He crawled forward through frozen underbrush, until he could see the crossroads. And there it was. A Tiger tank, sitting in the open. Left track clearly damaged. The road wheels on that side were canted at odd angles. The crew was visible. 3 men working around the damaged track with tools. They looked relaxed, not hurried, not worried. That was the first red flag. Mackay scanned the surrounding area through binoculars. Buildings on both sides of the crossroads. Windows dark, no movement, woods beyond the village, thick forest that could hide anything. He watched for 20 minutes, studied every detail. The Tiger crew went about their repairs with methodical efficiency. But they never looked around, never checked their perimeter, never posted security. That was the second red flag. German tank crews were trained better than that, especially Tiger crews, especially when they knew they were being hunted. He crawled back to his tank and climbed into the turret. His crew was waiting. Thompson looked at him and asked the question they were all thinking. Is it a trap? Mackay was silent for a moment. Then he said, Yes, I think it is. The question is, what kind of trap, and how do we spring it without dying? Martinez spoke up. If it is a trap, there are probably anti-tank guns in those buildings. Maybe Panzerfausts. Maybe another tank hidden in the woods. They are using the damaged Tiger as bait. We show up to kill it. They kill us. Mackay nodded. That was his assessment, too. The Germans had studied his tactics. They knew he attacked from unexpected angles. They knew he got close. They knew he targeted weak points. So they had created a situation that would force him to expose himself. A wounded Tiger that he could not pass up. An opportunity too good to refuse. Riley lit a cigarette. So what do we do? Turn around? Report it as a trap? Mackay thought about that. About Harrigan's order. About the fact that if he refused to engage, the colonel would send a Sherman platoon. And the Shermans would die because they would drive straight into the kill zone like targets at a range. He thought about Vickers and his fresh scar, about the crews who were starting to trust his methods, about Danny. No, Mackay said, we do not turn around. We spring the trap, but we do it on our terms. He spent the next 30 minutes studying the terrain, looking for an approach that the Germans would not expect. They had set their ambush assuming he would come from the American lines to the west. They had positioned their anti-tank guns to cover that direction. The buildings flanking the crossroads had good fields of fire to the west. But what about the north? Mackay traced a route on his map. There was a farm track that ran behind the village, overgrown, barely visible. It curved around and approached the crossroads from the north, where the forest was thickest and the buildings provided less coverage. If he could get behind the village, if he could position himself north of the crossroads, he could see the Tiger from an angle the German ambushers were not covering. And more importantly, he could see the ambush positions themselves. The buildings where the anti-tank guns were hidden, the woods where supporting infantry might be waiting. He could turn the trap inside out, make the hunters into targets. He told his crew the plan. Thompson would drive them in a wide arc through the forest, staying well away from the village until they reached the farm track from the north. They would approach slowly, quietly, and when they got into position, Mackay would not shoot the Tiger. He would shoot the buildings, blast through the walls with high explosive rounds and kill whoever was hiding inside. Force the Germans to react. Make them reveal their positions, then deal with them before going after the Tiger. Martinez stared at him. That is insane. If there are anti-tank guns in those buildings and we miss, they will blow us apart. Mackay met his eyes. Then do not miss. They moved out at 1600 hours. Thompson drove the Stuart through the forest in a wide arc that took them 2 miles out of their way. The route was rough. Fallen trees, drainage ditches, terrain that would have stopped a heavier tank. But the Stuart was light enough and small enough to thread through gaps that a Sherman could not attempt. They moved slowly, engine at idle, tracks barely turning. The sun was setting, shadows growing long, visibility dropping. They reached the farm track at 1645. It was overgrown with weeds and barely wide enough for the tank. Thompson followed it south toward the village. Mackay stood in the turret with his head out, watching for tripwires or mines. The Germans were good at booby traps, but this track was too remote, too overgrown. They had not expected anyone to use it. At 1700, they reached a position where Mackay could see the crossroads through gaps in the trees. The Tiger was still there, still damaged. The crew was still working. But now Mackay could see something else. A building on the east side of the crossroads. Second-floor window. A shape that did not belong. The barrel of an anti-tank gun. Probably a POC-40, 75 millimeter. More than enough to kill a Stuart at this range. The gun was pointed west, covering the approach from American lines. Mackay scanned the other buildings. There, another position. Ground floor of a barn. Another gun barrel barely visible in the shadows. And there, movement in the woods south of the crossroads. Infantry, maybe a full squad. All of them positioned to kill whatever came for the Tiger from the west. None of them watching the north. Mackay dropped into the turret. Load high explosive. We are going to hit that building with the POC-40 first. Punch through the wall and detonate inside, then traverse to the barn and do it again. Fast, before they can react. Riley loaded an HE shell. Martinez trained the gun on the building's second floor. The range was maybe 150 yards. Close enough. Mackay took a breath. Thought about the math, about the variables, about the fact that he was about to start a fight with German anti-tank guns that outranged and outgunned him by a factor of 3. Fire. The 37 millimeter gun cracked. The HE shell hit the building's second floor and detonated. The wall exploded. Bricks and timber blew outward. Someone screamed. Then the building caught fire. The POC-40 crew tried to evacuate, but the stairs were gone. Mackay watched one man jump from the second floor window and not get up. Martinez traversed to the barn. Riley loaded another HE shell. The German infantry in the woods was reacting now. Mackay could see them moving, trying to figure out where the fire was coming from. The Tiger crew had stopped working and was running for their tank. Martinez fired again. The second He round hit the barn at ground level. The explosion was massive. The POC-40 inside must have been loaded because secondary detonations blew the barn's roof off. Then everything went wrong. A Panzerfaust rocket streaked out of the woods and hit the Stuart's front armor. The explosion rocked the tank. Thompson shouted something Mackay could not understand. Smoke filled the crew compartment. Mackay could not see, could not breathe. His ears were ringing. He grabbed the radio handset by instinct and screamed into it. "Contact! Contact! We are taking fire at L'Outremange!" Then he dropped the handset and started pulling Riley up through the turret. The old man's face was covered in blood. A vision block had shattered and driven fragments into his cheek. He was still alive, but he was not conscious. Thompson got the tank moving. Reverse. Full power. The Stuart lurched backward through the trees. Another Panzerfaust round hit where they had been positioned 2 seconds earlier. Martinez was firing the 37mm gun blindly into the woods, suppressing fire. Mackay got Riley out of the turret and laid him across the engine deck. The old man's breathing was shallow but steady. Head wound. Not fatal if they could get him to a medic. The Stuart burst out of the forest onto open ground. Bad. No cover. Thompson turned the tank and drove parallel to the tree line, trying to get distance. The Tiger was moving now. Track damage forgotten. Maybe it had been faked. Maybe the repairs had worked. It did not matter. The Tiger's turret was traversing, looking for them. The 88mm gun swinging toward their position like death itself. Thompson saw it coming. He did not wait for orders. He drove the Stuart straight into a drainage ditch at full speed. The tank dropped 6 feet and slammed into the bottom. The impact threw Mackay against the turret rim. His ribs cracked. Pain exploded in his chest. But they were below ground level now. Concealed. The Tiger fired. The shell passed overhead so close Mackay felt the pressure wave. It hit the ground 50 yards behind them and detonated. They sat in the drainage ditch, while the Tiger fired twice more. Both shells missed. The German commander could not get the angle to hit a target below ground level. After the third shot, the Tiger stopped firing. Mackay waited. 5 minutes. 10. His ribs were screaming. Riley was unconscious on the engine deck. Martinez had a broken nose from the impact, but he was functional. Thompson was asking if they should move. Mackay told him to wait, to be patient, to let the Germans think they had won. Darkness fell. Full dark. No moon. Mackay climbed out of the ditch and observed. The Tiger was gone. Pulled back into the village. The buildings were burning. He could see German infantry moving in the firelight. They were searching the area, looking for the Stuart's wreckage. They would not find it. Not in the dark, not in the ditch. Mackay climbed back into the tank. "We move after midnight," he said, "back to our lines. Slow and quiet. Riley needs a medic." Thompson nodded. Martinez was holding a rag to his broken nose. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Thompson said what they were all thinking. They were waiting for us. They knew we were coming. How? Mackay did not answer. He was thinking about the briefing, about Harrigan's insistence that this was a good target, about how the intelligence had been too specific, too detailed, about the fact that someone had known exactly how to bait him into a trap. The Germans had not just adapted to his tactics. They had weaponized them, turned his own methods against him, created the perfect scenario to kill the Stuart that had been killing Tigers. They had failed this time. Barely. But they would try again. And next time, they might succeed. Mackay looked at Riley's unconscious form, at Martinez's broken face, at Thompson's hands shaking on the controls. His crew had trusted him, and he had almost gotten them killed. The hunter had become the hunted. And the hunted had learned that survival required more than tactics and courage. It required knowing when to stop hunting, when to recognize that the enemy was not stupid, that they learned, that they adapted, that they set traps for ghosts who thought they were invisible. Mackay made a decision in that ditch. He would make one more kill, one more Tiger, to prove the Germans had not beaten him, to prove his crew had not suffered for nothing, to prove his methods still worked. But after that, he was done hunting. After that, he would go back to reconnaissance missions and roadside security and all the things that kept light tank crews alive. Because Danny had died being brave, and Mackay had promised his father he would not be stupid like his brother. There was a difference between brave and stupid. He had just learned where that line was. Riley survived. 12 stitches in his face and a concussion that left him with headaches for the rest of his life. The medics at the field hospital said he was lucky. The vision block fragments had missed his eyes by millimeters. He would be back on duty in 2 weeks. Mackay visited him on December 1st and found the old man sitting on a cot smoking a cigarette with his head wrapped in bandages. Riley looked at him and said, "When do we go back out?" Mackay told him the truth. "We do not. I am done hunting tigers." Riley was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "Good," he said, "because I do not think my daughter can handle another telegram." Mackay went back to the motor pool and told his crew they were returning to reconnaissance duty. Thompson looked relieved. Martinez said nothing, but his shoulders relaxed in a way Mackay had not seen in weeks. They spent the next 2 days doing maintenance, replacing the damaged vision blocks, repairing the front armor where the Panzerfaust had hit, painting over the 5 black crosses on the turret. Mackay did that himself, used a brush and olive drab paint and covered each cross until they were gone, like they had never existed. On December 3rd, Colonel Harrigan called Mackay to his command post. The colonel looked older. The stress of command was visible in the lines around his eyes. He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Mackay. "Sit down, Lieutenant. We need to talk." Mackay sat. Harrigan took a long drink of coffee and then said, "I received orders from Division. They want to know about your tactics. How you killed those tigers. They want to document it. Maybe turn it into training material for other light tank crews." Mackay felt something cold in his stomach. "Sir, I do not think that is a good idea. The Germans know about my methods now. They set a trap for me. They are adapting. If we document this and distribute it, they will adapt faster. More crews will die trying to replicate what I did." Harrigan nodded. "I told Division the same thing. But they do not care about doctrine. They care about morale. They want a story. An American tank crew taking on tigers and winning. Something to put in newspapers back home. Something to make people feel like we are winning this war." Mackay stared at his coffee. "With respect, sir, we are winning this war. We do not need propaganda about light tanks killing tigers. We need tactics that keep tankers alive." Harrigan smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You are right. But nobody asked me. And nobody asked you. Division wants to interview you and your crew. They are sending a correspondent. He will be here tomorrow." The correspondent arrived on December 4th. His name was Patterson. He was a civilian attached to the Army as a war reporter. Mid-40s, expensive coat, a face that had never seen combat. He set up in a tent with a typewriter and called Mackay in first, told him to sit down and tell his story. Mackay sat there for 5 minutes in silence. Then he said, "There is no story. I did my job. My crew did their jobs. We got lucky a few times. That is all." Patterson looked annoyed. "Lieutenant, I have heard from multiple sources that you killed 5 tigers in 2 weeks using a tank that should not be able to kill tigers. That is not luck. That is skill. That is courage. That is exactly the kind of story people need to hear. So tell me how you did it." Mackay thought about Danny burning to death, about Riley's face covered in blood, about the German officer staring up at the ridgeline with fear in his eyes, about Thompson's hands shaking after they escaped the drainage ditch. He thought about what would happen if Patterson wrote this story, if it got published. If other light tank crews tried to replicate his tactics without understanding that he had been one mistake away from death every single time. He looked at Patterson and said, "I cannot help you. Find another story." Patterson spent the next 2 days trying. He interviewed Thompson, who gave him one-word answers and refused to elaborate. He interviewed Martinez, who said he was just following orders. He interviewed Riley, who told him to go to hell. On December 6th, Patterson packed his typewriter and left. Harrigan told Mackay that division was disappointed, that there would be consequences for refusing to cooperate. Mackay said he understood and went back to his tank. Then the Germans attacked, December 16th, 5:30 in the morning, the largest German offensive since 1940. A massive assault through the Ardennes forest using 3 armies and hundreds of tanks. The Battle of the Bulge. Everything changed overnight. Units were scattered. Communications broke down. The front line dissolved into chaos. Mackay's battalion was caught in the initial assault. They fought a running retreat for 3 days, lost half their tanks, lost more men than Mackay could count. The Shermans that had called his Stuart a joke were burning wrecks scattered across frozen roads. On December 19th, Mackay's company was holding a crossroads village called Chenogne. 40 men, 6 tanks, 3 Shermans, and 3 Stuarts, including Mackay's. German forces were pushing from 3 directions: infantry, armor, artillery. The company commander was a lieutenant named Braddock, who had taken command 2 days earlier after his captain was killed. Braddock was 23 years old and terrified. He gathered the tank commanders in a basement and spread a map on a table. "We cannot hold this position," he said. "Division wants us to delay the German advance as long as possible, then fall back to the next defensive line." His hands were shaking. He looked at Mackay. "You have combat experience against German armor. What do you recommend?" Mackay looked at the map, at the roads converging on the village, at the forest surrounding them, at the fact that they were outnumbered and outgunned and would probably die if they stayed. He thought about saying they should retreat immediately, save what was left of the company, live to fight another day. That was the smart move, the safe move. But then he thought about the American units falling back all along the line, about the Germans pushing forward unchecked, about the fact that someone had to slow them down or the whole front would collapse. He pointed at the map. "The Germans will come down these 3 roads. They will expect us to defend the village. We should not be in the village. We should be in the forest on the flanks, hidden. Let them roll into the village thinking we retreated. Then hit them from the sides. Ambush tactics. We can kill a few tanks before they realize what is happening. Maybe delay them long enough for other units to establish defensive positions behind us." Braddock was quiet. Then he said, "That is suicide. If we leave the village, we lose our prepared positions. If we get into the woods, we could be cut off." Mackay met his eyes. "We are cut off already. At least this way we take some of them with us." They moved the tanks into the forest at dusk. 3 Shermans on the left flank, 3 Stuarts on the right. Spread out. Concealed. Waiting. Mackay positioned his Stuart between 2 large fir trees, with a clear line of fire to the main road. His crew was silent. Thompson had not made a joke in 3 days. Martinez cleaned his gun with mechanical precision. Riley was back on duty despite the doctor's orders. His face was still bandaged, but his hands were steady. The Germans came at dawn. A column of vehicles, half-tracks, supply trucks, and tanks. Mackay counted 3 Panzer IVs, 2 Stooges, and leading the column, a Tiger. It rolled down the road into the village like it owned the world. Turret, traversing left and right. Commander, standing in the cupola. The same arrogance Mackay had seen in every Tiger crew he had faced. The belief that nothing could touch them. Mackay let the column roll into the village, waited until they were committed, until they started spreading out to search the buildings. Then he gave the order. All units, open fire. The forest exploded. 6 tanks firing at once from concealed positions. The German column disintegrated. A half-track exploded. A Panzer IV took a Sherman round to the side and caught fire. A Stooge tried to return fire, but could not see where the shots were coming from. The Tiger reacted instantly. Its turret traversed toward the forest. The commander was shouting orders. The main gun fired. The 88mm shell hit a tree near one of the Shermans and detonated. Shrapnel ripped through the forest. Then the Tiger's turret kept traversing, looking for targets, looking for the tanks that were killing its column. Mackay watched the Tiger through his periscope. He was not hunting anymore. He had promised himself he was done. But the Tiger was right there, 70 yards away. Side armor exposed as it scanned the forest to the left. One shot. One last Tiger. Not because he wanted to prove anything. Not because he was trying to be a hero. Because if he did not kill it, the Tiger would kill the Shermans. Would kill Braddock and his terrified crew. Would kill men who were just trying to survive long enough to see home again. He told Martinez to fire. The 37mm gun cracked. The shell hit the Tiger's side armor at the sponson. Penetration. Fire. The Tiger stopped moving. Its turret stopped traversing. For a moment, everything was still. Then the German crew started bailing out. The commander first. Then the gunner. Then the driver. They ran from their burning tank and disappeared into the smoke. The German column retreated. What was left of it? 3 vehicles destroyed. The Tiger, burning in the middle of the road. The Americans held the village for 6 more hours. Then they fell back as ordered. Braddock's company had lost 2 Shermans and 8 men, but they had delayed the German advance, given other units time to dig in. Done their job. That night, Mackay sat in his tank and realized he had killed his 6th Tiger. He had not planned to, had not wanted to. But when the moment came, when his crew needed him, when other crews needed him, he had done it anyway. Because that was what combat was. Not glory, not heroism. Just doing what needed to be done and hoping you survived. On December 22nd, the weather cleared. Allied aircraft filled the sky. The German offensive stalled. The tide turned. By early January, the Germans were retreating. The battalion was pulled back for rest and refit. Mackay's crew was alive, battered, exhausted, but alive. Thompson had lost 20 pounds. Martinez had developed a nervous tic. Riley's headaches were getting worse, but they were breathing. That was all that mattered. In late January, Harrigan called Mackay to his command post one last time. The colonel handed him a folder. Inside were typed pages. A report. Mackay skimmed it and felt his stomach drop. It was an after-action review of light tank effectiveness during the Ardennes offensive. It mentioned Mackay by name. mentioned his 6 Tiger kills, mentioned his tactics, and it concluded that light tanks using unconventional ambush methods had proven effective against heavy armor under specific circumstances. The report recommended further study, recommended documenting these tactics for training purposes, recommended interviewing Lieutenant Mackay and his crew for detailed technical analysis. Mackay looked at Harrigan. "Sir, this is exactly what I was afraid of. If this report gets distributed, if Division starts teaching these tactics, crews are going to die trying to replicate them. What I did was not doctrine. It was desperation. It only worked because the Germans were not expecting it. Now they are. Now they know. Teaching this to other crews is murder." Harrigan took the folder back. "I know. That is why this report is going to disappear." He walked to a wood stove in the corner of the tent, opened the door, and threw the folder into the fire. They both watched it burn. When it was gone, Harrigan said, "Division wanted a legend. They wanted a story about an American hero killing tigers in a toy tank. But legends get people killed. So there will be no legend. There will be no story. Your 6 kills will be listed as battalion aggregate totals. Your name will not appear in any reports. When this war is over, nobody will know what you did." Mackay watched the flames, thought about Danny, about Riley's face covered in blood, about the German commander falling from his turret with his uniform smoking, about all the men who had died in Shermans and Stuarts and Tigers, because someone decided they should fight. He thought about going home to Iowa, about his father asking what he did in the war, about having no answer, no medals, no recognition, just the memory of 6 Tigers burning and the knowledge that he had done what needed to be done. He looked at Harrigan. "Thank you, sir." The colonel nodded. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. The war is not over yet." Mackay walked back to his tank. His crew was doing maintenance. Thompson was checking the tracks. Martinez was cleaning the gun. Riley was smoking and looking at the photograph of his daughter. They looked up when he approached. Thompson asked if everything was okay. Mackay said yes. They went back to work. The Stuart sat there in the motor pool with no tally marks on its turret. No black crosses, no evidence of the impossible things it had done. Just another light tank in a war full of tanks. Years later, after the war ended, after Mackay went back to Iowa and married a girl from Des Moines and worked his family's farm, he would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, hearing the sound of a Tiger's engine. He would lie in the dark and remember the math. 16 tons against 70, 37 millimeters against 88, 2 inches of armor against 7, the numbers that said he should have died, the reality that said he lived. He never told his wife about the Tigers, never told his children, never told anyone, because legends were for men who wanted glory. And Mackay had learned the difference between glory and survival. One made you famous, the other brought you home. He had chosen home, and he had never regretted it. But sometimes, on cold November mornings when the fog was thick and the frost was on the fields, he would stand in his barn and remember a forest in Belgium. Remember a crew that trusted him. Remember 5 shots that should have been impossible, and 1 final shot that saved lives he would never meet. And he would think about the German tank crews who had died afraid of a toy that became a nightmare. About the fact that war was not about heroes and villains, it was about scared men in metal boxes trying to kill each other before they got killed first. And sometimes, just sometimes, the smallest box won. Not because it was stronger, but because it refused to fight fair. Because it understood that survival was not about honor. It was about going home. And Mackay had brought his crew home. That was the only victory that mattered. The only legend worth telling. And the only story they would never write.